by Board Member Partridge. We are officially convened as the Provo City School District Board of Education. Our first item on the agenda this morning is a report on school opening and COVID update. And Keith, are you going to take that? Or
I'll just start this. I've asked assorted members of the group to speak up and contribute what they know. This will probably be, we'll start off talking about just general back to school impressions, and then we'll move into a COVID update. We've allowed a lot of time for this, so feel free to ask questions, and we will just begin, I guess, by just sharing what we've seen. I've been in probably about a third of the schools so far as we've started the year, and from what I've seen, everything has been orderly. There have been many principals who reported that things have been positive, smooth, good feelings within the schools, students who are excited to be there, teachers who are excited to be there, and lots of happiness and relief, I think, just to get the year underway. Today is officially day, what would you say, day 4 of instruction in our new alternating day model, and so far it's been very smooth, very encouraging, very positive. So, I mean, there are always things that pop up and things to manage, but principals, we had a meeting with principals yesterday, and they're good at bringing things forward if there are issues and concerns, and they continue to do that. So let's start with Todd and have him give a report, and we'll just work our way around with different council members reporting on their respective areas.
Yeah, I just echo what the superintendent said. I've been in every secondary school. I'm in contact with principals every day. So far, so good in terms of the start. Everyone feels really good about how we've moved forward. You know, I think some of the challenges are still trying to work out the mechanics of this kind of new reality we're living in. And the fact that every day we seem to have a new case that pops up at one of the schools, whether it's a student or a potential teacher. We're trying to sort through whether that's an actual positive or simply they've been asked to isolate. But we're starting to see that number increase every day by 1 or 2 here and there. So that's the reality that we're somewhat facing. eSchool is up and running. We have teachers assigned. We're working through some of the mechanics there. There's still some hiccups in terms of getting all the kids properly placed, but I think we're moving forward there, so that's a good thing. In addition to that, working with, after our last meeting, I shared some information about indicators for opening, and I know this has become somewhat of a topic of conversation in the community of how will we know when we're ready to transition to the next phase, and taking some feedback from board members and then also processing it with our safety committee, which represents all the departments across the district. I think we've put together a process. If I can share this with you, I'll kind of walk you through this document that we've put together. Maybe if it'll let me. There we go. So this is the document that I shared with the board in our last meeting. It's since been refined and updated. If I make this large enough so you can see it. So as you know, we have identified 3 phases. The first phase is the half capacity of our buildings every other day, 4 days a week scenario that we're currently in. And then the second phase is moving towards more of all students for a half time over those same 4 days. We recognize that there may be a need for additional phasing as the the needs arise, to help us determine when it would be appropriate to change and how we might make that change. We've outlined a process that includes our safety committee, and they're monitoring conditions in the district daily. And we're sharing data every day about positive rates, cases per 100,000 in Provo specifically, and then cases in our specific schools. We've refined our data, our key data, to those three metrics based off information from the CDC and then feedback from the board and others. So our target for positive rates over a 7-day period is to be less than 5%. Currently, we're about 8.5% statewide. Our goal for daily cases per 100,000 in Provo is to get to 12. There's about 120,000 residents in Provo. So if we can get to 12 cases, then we'd feel like we're doing a really good job in terms of controlling community spread as a community, not as necessarily a district. Currently, our data shows we're about 20. We're hovering around 20. And then cases per school site within 7 days, we're trying to get down to less than 3. And we're there in places, but again, I think the data, it's too new into the year to have a really good set of data to say where we're at. Like I said, we're starting to see reports every day, 1 here, 2 there. And as you may be aware, we had a much larger incident yesterday with an elementary school. And I'm sure Alex will love to talk about that. To help our safety committee in terms of processing, because we don't want to make it necessarily all about the data, that there are other factors that we should be considering, and how do we understand the data when we do see it. We've developed some key questions about looking at the rate. What does it mean? What direction is it trending? I think that's an important piece for us. What does it suggest about potential spread in our community? So we want to ask critical questions in that committee about that data to understand it better. Look at the positive cases in our school. What does it mean as well? If we start to consider phasing, is it simply elementary or secondary or both? When we start to think about changes, what other changes might we consider if there's a need based off what we're seeing to change our phasing altogether that makes sense. We want to be thoughtful about a target date for any transition. We know that the system will need some lead time once a decision is made. So what makes sense there? And very importantly, how will we communicate this out, both within the district and out into the community, into our families? Communication being key, as we all realize that. Some additional questions that we feel are important to help us contextualize any decision is looking at, what's our impressions, what's our perception of the community's efforts around masks and social distancing. Are we as a community really committed to containing the virus, or do we see that, that we don't see that, there's not necessarily that commitment? The fear is that if we rush too quickly into a broader opening, that we might see huge spikes that will shut us down. Again, our goal has always been not just to open, but to stay open throughout the year. So to do that thoughtfully. How are we doing in terms of cleaning and disinfecting in our building? How are teachers managing this new reality of in-person as well as online? There are many other questions we could and should be asking about transportation and food services, but this gives you a sense of how we need to contextualize whatever we're seeing in the data to make an informed decision. And then thinking about strategies for reopening, prioritizing how we might go about it, believing that the younger students are most likely the greatest need, and so first priority for our opening would look at elementary students and students with special needs, and then to start to look at middle school students and broadening that special need population, and then moving third and fourth in regards to the high school students, believing that they are knowing that they're at greater risk, I think, in terms of spread, but also believing that they're better able to manage this kind of hybrid model more so than maybe the elementary students. And So being thoughtful about how we go about this, I think, is key. Questions, comments, feedback on this. There's been some process around this. I know that board members have given input, and we appreciate that. That's been really helpful to refine our thinking around it. Julie?
At one point you said, you made a distinction between community and Provo district.
Yes.
What is that? Like, are we looking outside of Provo?
Well, you know, the indicators of community spread, going back to the positive rate and cases per 100,000. As a district, we only have a small portion in that.
So are you
right?
talking people that are actively engaged in this?
So
you're talking all of
this is
Provo?
truly,
Okay.
for us to really be successful moving forward, this has to be a full community effort. From the city through our neighborhoods, we all have to be invested in controlling the spread if we're gonna be really successful. Schools are nothing more than a reflection of our neighborhoods. Whatever's going on in our neighborhoods is going to exist in our schools. And the schools, as best as they can, you know, we try as we may, we try to you know, hold the wall against some of the influences that are unproductive or not positive, but it still gets into our schools. And so we as a community have to be committed to these things if we want our schools to be ultimately successful.
Hey, I've got a quick question. Todd, are we going to be able to get this document out to the public? I just have a lot of people asking for the metrics. So is this something we can share with people?
Absolutely. I wanted to share this version with the board this morning before we started to move this forward publicly. I wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with it. You know, there was some question after the last meeting. We've refined it since that time. I wanted to give one more opportunity for the board to weigh in and give input. I've already spoken with Caleb about how we start to move this forward as a published document, so our community is very aware of the things that we're looking at.
Is there any way I can get a copy of it to look at it up close before
Yeah,
you publish them?
I'll send this version to the board, if not during this meeting, immediately after.
Thank you so much.
My question was on the end of the document about the
Priorities?
priorities, yes. So all of them look to me like things as we're moving forward and maybe changing phases, but the third priority, is that any different than what we're already doing with 9 through 12?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really, other than we start to look at other, I think, special need populations. So, you know, previously we talked about special education. I think there are other populations that are at great risk, such as ELL, that we need to consider and start in a third priority. We could start to see them getting greater access while maybe others are still in a hybrid.
So I would recommend just changing how we're phrasing that,
Yep.
because everything else is different from how we're already doing, and so I think it could confuse the public that goes
Certainly.
to that's what we're already doing.
Yeah, I can make adjustments.
Okay.
This was adapted from the Global Health Institute and their recommendations about thinking forward about school openings.
I think we still have the denominator problem. I mentioned that
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
I know some, especially the college kids, are like,
It's
I'm
getting-
not getting tested no matter what. And I think that's really strong in the community. And so the only people who are going to get tested are going to be, can't taste anything or hacking up their lung.
Nate, I think you're spot on there, and I think it's getting worse. It's
Yeah,
not getting better.
It's getting way.
And where we're really starting to see that play out, as I've learned more and more from those that live in this world, you know, as your test count goes down, and if you start to see your positive rate go up, it's an indicator you're not doing enough testing and that there's a lot of virus still in the community that's not being caught. And what we've really seen in the last, I think, week or so in the state specifically is that our positive rate is going up while our test count is dropping. It's a clear indication that we're not doing enough testing. There's still a lot of virus that's in the community, that's spreading, and we're just not doing enough to capture it through our testing mechanism. That's why it's important that we have multiple indicators. That's why the count per 100,000 is really key as well, because it gets really zeroed in on Provo and what we're doing here, and then looking at the case count at the school level.
And I thought what you guys did, it makes it doable now. It was really gonna be tough to get zero over 7 days, but I mean, 3, in the last 4 days, we've had 5. Is that where we've been? At least from when I first saw those numbers, we were like 60.
Yeah.
Now we were 65 yesterday, so.
That's right.
That's 5. I mean, so that number is doable. I also really like the way you guys prioritized. I thought that was really good. So I think this is a lot better than what we had.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, we don't have to hit every single target.
No. The targets are to inform us, right? We're not viewing them as a hard and fast, but they do provide us information. So if our positive rate is different than our case count, it begs that question, why? And I think that's where having key questions to drill down a little bit deeper to explain that. Is it possible we could get to a place as a group and make that decision that one variable may be off, but the other showing a different trend for us in Provo that allows us to feel confident going forward? Yes, I think that's very possible.
Yeah, I could see us be done the phase 1 in October with this one that you did, as long as we keep heading where we're headed.
Yeah. Multiple points to examine. I think it's key. You're not dependent on any one, and you don't look at them as hard and fast, but they more importantly, I think, paint a picture for you. And it's all about the inferences that you make from the data as opposed to what the data may say.
So I would just make sure we put some of that explanation on whatever the parents are gonna be seeing on our website or whatever, just so that they understand that's our target, but these are all the things we're considering as a whole picture.
I agree with that in terms of helping them understand how decisions were made. I think we also need to emphasize with them that, again, it's a community effort, and if we're seeing that some of these data points remain relatively high, we can't let up the effort. We need to make sure that we're doubling down on our efforts as a community to contain the spread.
You mentioned that the case rates in Provo are down to 8, right?
No, 20.
The rates. And I don't mean the number of cases. I'm
The
talking about
percentage of
the
testing.
case rate, so the number per 100,000. Like, we used to be above 10.
So Provo specifically, we have cases per 100,000
Right.
in Provo. And it's hovering about twice what we need it to be.
Right. Did you say 8? Like, I heard a number.
That's
So
a
it's-
statewide.
That's
Okay,
statewide,
but
the
our
positive
community
rate.
is still higher than that, right?
So statewide, the positive rate, that first number up there is around 8, and we need to see that down towards 5, or at
So-
least trending towards 5.
So we're looking at the state case rate, not the Provo case rate.
Well, there's a percentage of positive tests,
Right?
that's the
Right.
8%.
I'm not talking about testing. I'm
And the
talking
number
about
of
case
tests.
rate.
Then the number of cases in Provo specifically, which is the second number up there,
Mhm.
right? We're about double where we need to be.
Okay. So,
So-
and where we need to be is under 5, right?
It is 12.
Is-
So that 12 per 120,000.
Okay, before we were talking about the case rate, because that's the one I've been watching so closely, because that's, West Provo's way higher than
It
East
is.
Provo.
It is.
And so we were like overall around 10, and what was that?
10%.
Right,
Yeah.
right, well, the case rate,
Yep.
versus, the other side of town was,
That was the tweak we made,
Okay.
knowing that this was more in line with what the CDC was advising and what seemed to be more of a stable number. Once we were able to really zero in on Provo specific, which is what we're able to do, that's when we made that change. But I think what you're pointing out is that there's additional information and data on the county website
Right.
that breaks the city into thirds.
Right.
And you can look at it specifically between West Provo, East Provo, and the BYU North Bench. And I think that's, again, another data point that's really important for us to look at, that we would consider in this. We just made that switch, trying to stay in line with what the CDC has guided us. But you're exactly right. That point is there. It's around 10, if I remember correctly. and we need to get that down.
Why?
West Provo is getting hit the hardest.
Right, right. Well, I know just yesterday looking at it, I mean, before, like when we made our vote before, West Provo was, I'm not gonna remember the exact number, but it was about double what the east side was. Yesterday, West Provo went over 3,000. East Provo is, and this is total, I'm guessing, is just right below 2,000. Like it's kind of shocking to me that how wide that gap is.
Well, yeah, there's a lot that I think you can start to infer from that, right? About
Right.
how this virus has hit certain populations harder than others. I think the one takeaway for me is all three segments are still in the red zone based off that metric. And so we as a community need to do a better job. But what you're, I think, unearthing is some of the inequity in the virus and how it's really hit certain communities harder than others.
Now I just lost my train of thought. Thank you.
I do that sometimes.
Can you just explain to everybody when we'll be kind of looking at these metrics?
So our process within the safety committee is weekly. So we're on a weekly review to look at this and consider it. We've set Friday aside as that time to do so. So we're going to be evaluating this every week. You know, we changed. Originally was looking at it over the course of a term, and then we moved it 2 weeks, and now we feel more comfortable doing it on a weekly basis.
So I hate to be the little rain cloud here, but this entire plan is based on tracking how things get better toward a full reopening. I mentioned to council yesterday that I would like us to be tracking other metrics as well to make sure that we can continue to run school. For example, how many subs are available to us if we get a large increase in the number of teachers or other staff who get sick? At what point do we run out of subs for our bus drivers or our child nutrition workers or our aides or any number of other work groups within the entire district and system? So we need to get a feel for that too, because it's possible that if this continues to spread and increase, that we could get to the point where we have to bring a recommendation to the board about going the other direction. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying I want it to happen. I just think that we need to be ready and know what kind of, when I say the word losses, I don't mean loss of life, of course. I mean in terms of impact on number of subs, teachers available, people who can continue to keep school going. We have to get an idea of how many of those we can absorb and still keep school underway. So that's starting to be looked at this week as well.
How are we doing with custodial hiring?
Jason, do you know exactly how many?
We were working to get an additional 80 people than what we normally would hire. We're in the range of about 50 of those people having been hired now. The only concern with that is sometimes, you know, that's the number of people hired, not all of them have stayed. So we're still working on it. We've been, you know, been fortunate to have a lot of people who've been interested, and we're still working towards our goal. Jeff feels very comfortable with the fact that they're putting in a great effort to try to keep things clean. We've set guidelines for employees to be out of the buildings at certain times so that the cleaning can occur without people continuing to potentially contaminate areas after the cleaning has occurred until the next day when students arrive again. So there's been a lot of effort towards making sure the custodial crew has that opportunity to take care of things, and they've been doing great work.
Yeah, I would say that the superintendent's prompting, I think, is really timely and forward-thinking, because what we're finding is that you know, our guidelines from the state talk about positive rates, and there are benchmarks for when a class or a school should go online based off a positive rate. What we're finding is we have an overwhelming number of people that are not necessarily positive but have been asked to quarantine for 14 days. And so now the question is at what point that what point do we lose so many people that makes it almost impossible to operate a department or a school? What's that threshold? And I think that's something that we have to look at very carefully, because it starts to diminish our ability to serve kids.
Are we making it possible for teachers who do have to quarantine, but they're not sick, they just have to stay home at a caution, that they could like conference into their own classroom and be the main teacher there, and we just have an aide there in person, but they're still teaching?
So we have worked through those situations. The current leave, the federal leave that we're using for people who are out on COVID, allows for people to, they answer a survey basically helping us understand where they are in their ability to continue working with their own health. And so even though they may have tested positive but they're not symptomatic, they can continue to work from remotely, and we then have coverage in the school with aides or other substitutes and teachers who are supporting the students. Now again, that's not an ideal situation, and we've had some pushback even from community members over those types of situations. So it's not something that's been always warmly received, but we've been able to do that, and we want to support our employees and continue in that opportunity to continue to work if they're not showing symptoms and they're able to continue to do so.
Did we ever hear a final decision from the city? Did they end up going with the resolution?
That's being talked about
Oh,
this
so they
evening.
haven't-
It's this evening.
They haven't completely finalized.
They do have a resolution, and then tonight they're gonna decide if they're gonna do a mandate or not.
Okay, so, right, okay. Wow.
Alex can report on elementary.
Well, and I just want to echo some of the positives that were shared already. I think in all honesty, getting school open was one of the best things we could have done. It really has eased some of the tensions that are out there of, are we coming back to school, are we not coming back to school, where are we? And getting our teachers back in the building with our students, man, that's such an exhilarating thing. It's such a positive thing to be able to walk in those buildings and see people excited and engaged with kids. In visiting with all the elementary schools, every administrator was just elated to be able to say, we've got kids in our building, we've got teachers teaching, we've got good things going on, and they were all really, really positive. There were a few hiccups along the way, but for the most part, overall, it felt really good. It felt positive, it felt comfortable, ironically enough, because there had been enough forethought, enough planning, enough preparation by both admin and teachers to be ready to receive the students that came into the building. That's a huge kudos to our staff out there that's really working hard, and they were anxious, and yet at the same time, once it did start, they felt good. They felt really good. And so things have been really, really in a positive light. There are still questions to be answered, still clarity on how things are working and moving forward, but for the most part, there are things that have moved us forward and saying, we got this, and we're ready to go and keep moving forward. I want to echo a couple of things that Todd also was recommending. I think context plays a huge part of any of our future decisions that we make, and to Keith's point, the superintendent, and recognize that it's not just the numbers up here that we're going to look at. We also have to look within our system. As you're aware, yesterday we were notified by the health department that there are some kids that have been asked to be quarantined based on some connection that they've had with exposure to some of the COVID cases. That means we've got some teachers as well that have been exposed, and so they're out. And so within a matter of less than 24 hours, we've had a number of teachers and support staff also go out. And so how do you keep schools open while at the same time bringing in somebody to come to the classroom to keep kids coming in class while still having somebody online? It really becomes a complicated issue. And where Jason has been huge in helping us to be able to say, okay, how do we get people in the classroom to be able to be there for those that are going to be there in person, while at the same time still having people online? It's complicated, and not that it's not doable in some senses, but at some point we're going to run out of people, and that's where I think the complexities are going to be becoming much more difficult to manage as we go forward. So context matters a big part of looking at this, but also recognizing, is it really doable as a system to be able to keep
Logistically.
things going, right? But for the most part, people are saying they can do this, and we can do this. And I will echo Todd's sentiment of saying, our intent with this plan was to open and to stay open. We don't want to shut down. And my son came home yesterday, and he's in another district, and he's like, dude, it's a matter of time. There were kids that came to school with COVID, and they were exposing other kids, and they're putting a bunch of other kids on quarantine now, and they're all going out. So it's one of those situations where we've just got to be intentional about what we do and be really systematic to support, so that we can stay open and meet our community's need and continue to progress towards reopening fully with kids fully in the building. So I'm excited, I'm grateful for working with our staff that's really trying to keep our buildings open and being intentional about what we're doing. I'm grateful for your feedback. I think we've got the right balance. And now it's just saying, how do we move to the next phase and keep us moving trajectory-wise that way? So really, really good stuff, really positive. So questions for me? Yeah.
Either one of you, can we just talk for a second, mostly to get on the record for people in the community who want more? What guidelines are we required to follow as far as disclosing who and where and all of that?
Yeah. So there are two federal laws. One is around student school records, FERPA. So if there's an educational record, we're not permitted to disclose. The one that plays the most into this is HIPAA, which is a health record protection. And so if an individual, whether employee or a student, becomes infected, there is somewhat of a need to know and pretty firm barrier about who we share that with and how, with ultimately the intent of protecting their privacy. So we're not going to be sharing student names, we're not going to be sharing necessary classrooms, as minimally as possible. We may identify schools if it goes into a disclosure, because ultimately we need to maintain their privacy as they're dealing with a health issue.
And part of that tension point too is being able to communicate and answer questions as things become more available for the community. Even though we don't necessarily say anything, the community talks about it or it gets out into the public. And so we've got to be able to start answering questions. So it's that balance of being able to say, how do we be available to answer questions and still address the issue, while at the same time maintaining those confidences, because we really do value that confidence. And as Todd said, those laws are there for a reason, and we're intending to continue to honor those laws.
And I've noticed with a few people, I mean, rumors are flying. We can't necessarily squelch all the rumors, but I'm not sure how to address, like you guys, yesterday I heard one was that was floating around was that 9 students showed up to one of our high schools deliberately to spread. Like they showed up infected, you know, and so is our mechanism to squash that type of thing? You guys?
Yeah, so we have some mechanisms in place to be able to recognize those situations and address them on a day-to-day basis. So one of the great things about our system is that we have nurses at the schools that are direct contacts with the health department. So they have information that is relative to people who have tested positive. So if a student was identified in a specific school, they could be able to be looking for that student, and we have what we call a point of contact at each building. It's usually the principal, who is also given certain information to be able to keep other students safe. So that may be that there's a case that we want to be looking at whether or not they come to school, communicating with the family to talk about how we help them continue their education and keep them safe. So there's a lot to this, but I think we have some mechanisms, some ability to try to monitor who's coming and going from the building and how we support keeping people safe and not being exposed in what we can control. Now, it's not a perfect system in any way, but we do have a system that we've been using to try to monitor those kinds of situations like you described.
Well, I know, we've got, as we all know, we've got a lot of people who are really, really anxious to get back. Understandably, we've also got a lot of people in the community who are really nervous. And so as they hear, oh, there's a case at, you know, whatever elementary school, for example, and was that my kid's classroom, was that my kid's teacher, they just start, and I understand 100%, you know, FERPA and HIPAA, and I get all of that. But we also know in Provo, and I don't know that we're worse than any other community, rumors spread. And so I think the sooner we can, with whatever information we have, kind of tamp that stuff down, be reassuring to some of those parents who are anxious on the other side. And so I guess, like yesterday when I heard that one, you know, I asked other board members, have you guys heard this, anything? But should we be directing those questions directly to you guys so that we can?
Yeah, I feel like you can always ask us specific to any, you know, to any school or any situation. I would address what, you know, kind of that example as being a rumor. You know, I don't believe that actually occurred yesterday. But again, I think that's where we'd want you to be able to feel welcome to ask us questions so we could try to address them the best that we can. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things going around about what may or may not have happened, and we can try to clarify. Sometimes rumors do kind of grow and spread on their own, even if they are not true, not based in the truth.
And this is where I think we'll be happy to answer and address any concerns that you have. We're really trying to empower our administrators to be that really good communication point, trying to help address some of those issues or concerns. So a lot of those things, if they do come up, let's kick them back to the administrator and then give us a heads up so we can continue to support and make sure that we're addressing those on a regular basis.
And so if we're talking individuals, that's really clear cut, but if we have somebody say, hey, I heard there were this many cases at this school, should we be confirming that? Should we not be confirming that? What kind of guidance can you give us for?
And I do think that, you know, Melanie sits on our safety committee. She hears on a day-to-day basis the number of new cases that that have been identified. We have members of the health department who sit on that committee. So again, we believe we're getting the most accurate information on a day-to-day basis, and we want to keep you up to date and informed through that process. So again, I don't think there's a problem with you asking. I think it's a great thing if you want to reach out to us. Again, even reaching out to Melanie, because she has a lot of that information, and making sure that we can be helpful to you in addressing any questions or concerns.
And I'd probably put an even finer point to this. There's been a lot of pushback on specific measures such as the masks. Masks seem to be the most controversial piece, and we have been responding to rumors about mask protests in our schools. This is something that's been going on, I guess, down in Washington County. They've had a couple of incidents of this. We've heard rumors about our schools being involved. That probably is the biggest challenge that we're facing, is how to manage a situation like that. When you've lost the community's willingness to help out. And I can't stress the importance of this. Has got to be a community effort. And for individuals to go into that idea of protesting, I just worry about what the implications that has for our schools in terms of remaining open and being able to stay open.
And I think Todd just addressed something that helps us define the difference between a rumor and fact. Because sitting here today, one of the things I wanted to mention is a thank you to our community for the way students arrived at school on the first day and have continued to wear their masks and be helpful in this process, because on that end, our community has been wonderful. We have had rumors of kids showing up at school without masks or protests of no mask, but in actuality, we've had kids arriving for the bus with their masks on, being transported and keeping their masks. You know, all the things that we would ask them to do, our community has been great in supporting us to this point. And so, one of my emphasis today was to say thank you for that, because this is a very interesting situation, a new thing for many people, And yet, a lot of people are trying to be helpful in keeping the schools open. A lot of people want their kids to be able to attend on a regular basis, and we appreciate that.
Can I piggyback on what Julie's been asking? Is there something we could do as a district to send out like a weekly update of some sort to the entire school district? Of like saying thank you for wearing masks, or like what metrics do we want to let the public know that these are what we saw?
We're trending in a certain
trending,
direction.
and these are our trends, so that they feel like we're having some transparency there.
I think there's always that potential of being able to share information. And I think this is something that definitely we could work with Caleb on, to be able to find a way to say, let's communicate. Because I would echo the sentiment of Jason here. We have had 3 great days because our community has been so committed to saying, let's make it happen. That's something that we want to be able to continue to echo and sentiment out of, saying, we value what you guys are doing, and we're working towards getting us open. Because that's our intent. That's what we really want to see happen. And so I think there's a way we can start messaging that out. That's something that we can look at and work on. I agree with you.
I love that idea of a weekly communication and showing appreciation, but also updates. I think that's great. What I was gonna suggest is also in the way of communication. I think maybe some of the concerns and the rumors and the parents who are stressed about things is they don't know what exactly to be concerned about if there is a positive case in their child's school or their child's classroom. And I know it's in the state documentation, but a lot of people don't know where all that is. So maybe we could send out some brief thing about, you know, if there's a positive case, this is what we're looking for. And if your child was not sitting within 6 feet of that person for, you know, longer than a few minutes, then you don't need to worry about it. We will contact those who were within proximity, and so if you're not contacted, you know, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a need for us to continue to be intentional and share information. Sometimes I believe there's a point at which we feel like, oh, we've shared this with principals, we've had the health department share something along those lines, guidelines of when you would need to stay home in quarantine, when you wouldn't, those kinds of things. But I think there's a continued effort that needs to be made, because despite information being shared, there's still a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of a lack of understanding. So we've got to continue to work on that. I would completely agree.
Well, I think you guys are living it and reading it and everything, and maybe the principals get it, but I don't know it's always disseminated down to the parents. So I just checked on our website and on our return plan page, and I don't see anything like very obvious about that. And so I think if we make it very obvious for the parents, it would help.
Yeah, it's a great question, because, for instance, Alex mentioned the impact at one school from a positive case, and then the quarantine that results from that case.
That's huge.
So you end up having a large number of people who are impacted. And again, I think Keith was putting a point on this, that not all of the impact to our system is about positive cases. Some of it is about how people are being directed to quarantine. And so, for instance, from Friday to Monday, we had a number of employees, about 15, who had been asked to quarantine from Friday to Monday. And not all of those were people who were feeling symptoms, but they had been near someone who had tested positive. And so, you know, with that in mind, yesterday's example of this school, where people were saying, this student in particular needs to be asked to be quarantined. Well, what about my other children? Do they need to be quarantined? Does our family need to be quarantined? And the answer from the health department and from the nurse, and even she sent out written guidelines about this, were that no, your family does not need to be quarantined. Your other students can still attend school. It's only when your student who was potentially exposed begins to show symptoms or needs to be tested, that then we would move to a greater phase of your family being impacted. So again, I think you're asking the right questions. I think this is a first for a lot of us, and we want to share good information, and so we need to continue to look at how do we get better information out there, how do we help share that kind of information.
I think we also did a lot of this early on, and it probably is time to release it again, because when we sent this out 2-3 weeks ago, there wasn't the same context as we have right now. So we can probably pull out some of the materials that we've already done, just do a reminder that here are the processes, here are the rules, these are the things, flow charts or those kinds of things that we've shared in the past.
And our staff are gonna be facing new scenarios as well. So it's not just the community, it's also our staff as well. I mean, yesterday's a prime example of this scenario playing out and saying, okay, so now what's the next step? And how do we support, how do we message that information out, Julie? Like you said, enough information to help people know that we're supportive and we're responsive and we're being there for our community. We're gonna continue to educate kids. Yet at the same time, safety is our priority. We wanna make sure that we keep everybody safe. And the whole point of quarantine some students is to support and make sure that they're safe, and as well as making sure that others are safe. And so it's that fine balance between communicating enough and not over-communicating things that shouldn't be shared.
Yeah, just with a little bit more of an HR update, and then I'll let other council members go. I just want to continue with a thank you. I want to say thank you to our bus drivers who were, brave and ready to be back at work. Our child nutrition people who hardly had a break because they continued to serve meals over the summer. And I want to say thank you to our teachers for coming back and doing all the work that they've done to teach kids new and interesting practices at the school about, making sure that they're being helpful in keeping people safe in the spread of this virus. And I want to say thank you to them for even facing some criticisms from time to time, because there are so many different perspectives in this about how some people, aren't necessarily as supportive of masks or other protective equipment. And yet we've tried to do what we can to keep people safe. And so I want to say thank you to our principals, our teachers, all of the faculty and staff who've made school possible. Because without them, again, we wouldn't be serving our community and our parents of our community in allowing their students to be able to attend the days that they can. So, thank you.
Teaching and learning. Well, it's a year unlike any others, and I will echo Jason's sentiment that I think our teachers really shone through. They buckled down, they were creative, and they've given a good beginning experience for our students. Where our work lies ahead is that teachers, the devil's always in the details, right? And teachers are facing a group of students who come one day, a group of students who come another day, and some students who never come. And there are real challenges in determining how we will best meet those needs. And that's I think where some of the growing concern is coming from. My department's working on that in terms of mentoring and coaching teachers, as well as providing planning resources, developing the model that we've talked about before, that our teachers right now are primarily digital teachers. We have time periods, either in person or online, where we can provide support to that. But we have to help these kids learn to be self-learners, because they're spending more school time at home than they are in a school building. So we're beginning those conversations. Our professional development this year, as I talked to in our last board meeting, is related to distance learning. It's a great resource we're building our professional development on. So I think teachers have spent time learning the Canvas platform, and there's been frustration in not understanding everything up front, but there's also been the response rate on the people who have completed that, and we have to have almost all of our teachers complete that. The reports are in the 90s for how helpful was this to you, how much can you use this. So we're really honing our supportive role right now in producing things and services to teachers to help them as we look at this very different kind of instruction right now. What's the best, most efficient way to use our time when we're in a hybrid or home study model.
Stephanie, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll stand up since I'm kind of back here in the corner. I guess report from child nutrition and transportation, things are going well. I think Jason's already kind of given a little bit of hint to that. We haven't had a lot of issues that I've been told about with kids not wearing masks on bus or anything like that. I know ridership is way down right now, partly because we're only going 50%, and I think partly because a lot of kids are schooling at home, or the parents are choosing to drive them to school. We don't know that for sure, but buses are running smoothly. I don't think we've had any issues, knock on wood. Child nutrition's been running smoothly. Like Jason said, they worked through the whole entire spring dismissal, so they kind of have this down pat a little bit. Things are going good in her area. The biggest concerns we have, which Keith already alluded to, are at what point in time do employees being out start impacting their ability to serve. So I've asked them to start giving that some thought and get some, maybe not black and white indicators, but some key indicators of where we're going to start running into troubles with providing routes. If we can't provide routes, how do we adjust? If we adjust, what else might that impact? And the same on child nutrition side. Business services down the hallway isn't overly impacted by this, other than taking care of the CARES funding and the GEARS funding and getting those things taken care of. PP&E, my team has worked their tail off getting PP&E out to schools. We've heard a lot of thank yous and appreciation for that. We're hearing that some school districts don't have a lot of PP&E in their classrooms. So, we were fortunate enough as a heavy Title I district to have a bit of CARES funding to help us with that. But we've also been fortunate enough that we know we've got some decent financial fund balances that we can dig into if we need to for extra hand sanitizers and cleaning products, etc. So a lot of districts are commenting on that they didn't quite get prepared. They didn't quite get stuff early enough. They're hearing teachers asking, where do you get the dividers? We want I think Melanie, you asked me about that. Where do you get the dividers? We want those. So from a PP&E standpoint, I think our district and mostly my team working their butts off to get that stuff out. Get it in first and then turn it around and get it all out to the schools. They deserve a kudo, and I've thanked them numerous times for that. So we'll continue to provide that PP&E. We've got hand sanitizer in the warehouse, just so that when they start running low, they've all got 2 of those big bottles in their classrooms. So high schools have 2 bottles, elementaries I think have 1. So hopefully they won't run out for a while, but we've got stock in the warehouse for extra sanitizer. We've got more hand sanitizer coming in. We've shipped out face masks. We've shipped out face shields. We've shipped out wipes, dividers, everything we can possibly think of to try to keep our kids safe and keep our teachers safe and our staff safe. So from my perspective, it was a good start to the school year. I think these guys need to be commended on their work that they put together to get the school open and get things running, and it felt good to, I keep using the term rip off the Band-Aid, but it felt good to rip off the Band-Aid and get it going. So
Nate, on all the PPE we've bought, have we spent all the money we've allocated for that, or do we still have some that we can get more when we need it?
Most of the CARES funding is not necessarily spent, but earmarked, and it's not all for PPE. Some of it's going to special ed services, some of it's going to the 12 hours that we had to give the teachers to get prepared with the online learning. So there's a lot of different things, and I can share that document again. It's been updated a little bit since last time I shared it with you all. So most of it's earmarked. We've got a little bit of a buffer left. We wanted to leave a little bit of money to have in case we needed it. The GEARS money is a little more geared towards special ed and at-risk. So we shifted some special ed stuff out of CARES and over there in order to open up some more CARES money. We've got some money set aside for more Chromebook replacements, as we know those are going to be needed come next spring as things don't come back in. We haven't dug a whole lot into the district's funds. Each of us have paid for small amounts of things out of our budgets as we've gone along, just to try to give us that buffer with the CARES money. I paid for a couple shipments of PP&E out of my budget because I had the money. I think Keith's paid for some stuff. I think almost all of us had a little bit of money left in our budgets at the end of the fiscal year that just closed, that helped absorb some of that. You know, when the spring shutdown happened, we actually had some places where we were saving money. So, I mean, principals weren't buying supplies anymore, utilities dropped a little bit, little things that enabled us to save a little bit of money too. So we haven't had to dig deep into our fund balances. I don't foresee us digging super deep into them, but we'll probably need some of them to keep those supplies on hand and keep them rolling. Like I said, we shipped out about half of the hand sanitizer we ordered. We've got another 150 cases of it in the warehouse, and Tina's got another order coming in, I think, 2 weeks. So
Okay.
we want to stay ahead of it. We don't want to get caught in not keeping it in stock and all of a sudden running out of something critical that we need. So that's probably the biggest thing is going to be the hand sanitizer. And then, of course, the custodial area's got to keep all their supplies in stock, and they're kind of taking care of that themselves. Gloves are a little hard to get right now. We've got some coming in. Jeff in custodial has even had a hard time getting gloves for his folks. So there's things that if you don't stay on top of it, you can find yourself in a pickle. We've had some good help from, you know, the USBE sent down some masks for students. The governor sent out some K95 masks for employees. I don't know if those have arrived yet. I heard one school got a delivery, and I haven't heard anything from any other schools. So we've had some other resources throughout the state helping school districts with that, that have helped us keep an eye on it.
We've had some great donations too.
Had some donations.
Wasn't the doTERRA one of those?
doTERRA, the Thieves hand sanitizer, they donated that. We gave that to a lot of employees. I think each of you as a board member got it. If you didn't, I'll get you one. We had a teacher, I probably shouldn't say her name in case she doesn't want it said, but we had a teacher who is unable to work right now that is making masks for our kids. She sent over 2 bags full of different size masks to go out to elementary schools. So there's been a lot of help and a lot of efforts all over the place, really. But anyway, so our next step is that, determining at what point in time do we start getting impacted to the point where services are rendered difficult. And I think transportation will be harder than child nutrition. Child nutrition, we can move some people around to other locations, you know, until we have numbers so high that it really starts impacting. Transportation will be the one that'll probably be the harder one to figure out how to deal with, should we have a lot of people go out with COVID on quarantine. So,
Okay, thank you. Doug?
Okay, I'll come up here where you can kind of see me a little bit better. Just working very cooperatively with the other supervisors on some of the projects that we have been talked about. So I will just talk about a couple of things that are maybe of interest to you. Our concern with the many things that have changed because of COVID is that you decided a month and a half ago about our change to attendance policy. Well, last message you wanted to say that learning was now optional, right? You heard me say it, I think, in the board meeting report 2 weeks ago. While we feel like participation is now an option for how attendance is now optional, how people will come to school or work remotely from home. Engagement participation is not optional. So we have developed this directive for our schools. I just want to hit a couple highlights on this that allows our teachers to do the ones who primarily hold the information whether students participating or not, because they're on the other side of either a student attending or on the other side of students getting online to Canvas and participating there. They'll see whether students being successful or not. So we've asked that, again, while we have an expectation here of people participating when they can or when they've chosen to with attendance, we'd like, second bullet here, all teachers are expected to record a weekly participation code in PowerSchool for all their students on how they're participating in the district learning options. A participation code should be assigned to each student once per week by the end of the workday on Friday. We're ironing out the details now of implementation. This is something we haven't done before, but we've had some great support and help from technology and so forth on creating a spot within PowerSchool and codes that can be assigned to each student. We feel like this feedback, of course, would be very helpful. You can kind of read the other bullets here about what we're looking for. This rubric, I'll just slide it up here, which I think that team that worked with me, Todd, Michelle Eldridge, others met with me, and we develop some of this language so you can get an idea of, we're not just talking about yes or no, because that's way too difficult to say to what degree, right? Is someone engaging? But we've developed everything from the left-hand side where you say, is the student even there, right? They're not logging in, they're not attending, we don't see any activity on Canvas that would suggest that they're benefiting at all. In other words, this is kind of like what we would say in the past was a non-attender. And would also argue the case, do they still live in the area? Should we be able to claim their enrollment, et cetera, right? So a P0 should really prompt many people within both the classroom, to the school administration level, to the district level, to saying some outreach needs to be generated right away, because we're not seeing any participation or engagement in learning. So that's a real critical thing. I think as we kind of were working in the spring, for instance, just as a context last spring, when we went to the remote learning, we struggled sometimes to knowing who our P0s were. And we found that our best way to find that out was to ask teachers, and they started generating some lists that we began to do outreach. But in many cases, it was quite late before we really were able to find people. And we also found, and I don't need to get on and on, but our contact information to people was a little bit dated, and so we had a hard time really finding some folks. So we've got a ton to be in a better situation this year to say, we don't want to create a big old crack for people to fall into and not be successful with our learning model, right? And I know that's what you're catching a lot of flack from, and we are too in the district office, saying, do you care enough about kids to make sure they're learning this year? This is our answer to that. Yes, we do. So you can see also teachers have the opportunity to give the student, parent, and us feedback as to different levels of engagement. You can see also there's the opportunity for them to state that they are in that P1, P2, and P3, which again, that would be the best spot for people to be in. This just kind of gives them an idea of how it works in Power School, and I mean, Tech has supported us in that. So this is something that I know Stephanie's headed up to visit with our state auditor, and that team up there is going to be looking at what our membership rules are going to be about getting the funding this year, because we aren't taking daily attendance the way we normally have. We want to make sure this also meets those school plans that we submitted, so that we still can secure the funding based on student engagement with us this year. On a related note to this one, we also visited yesterday with principals for a few minutes about how to mark attendance. And in phase one, where you have half your kids coming and some of the kids on home study, we determined that really for a student management perspective, knowing who's in your building at any time, if there was an emergency, if there was a parent or someone who came looking for a child, if we had to do contact tracing based on who was in the building on a certain day and so forth, we still have to take attendance. We have turned off, just so you're aware, we've turned off the calling system that would be possibly confusing or bothering people at this point, because again, attendance is no longer something that's a punishment or something we'd say is like this incentive thing that if you come perfect, we're going to give you like a luncheon or a drawing at the end of the month. As we've discussed in previous meetings, we know that eliminating those sorts of things is not only fair, but it's also probably our best practice, so people aren't falsely, well, not falsely, but improperly motivated to come sick to work or to school, right? So perfect attendance is something we're straying away from. It really is just a management data point for us to know who's in our buildings at any given time. So we'll continue to take attendance on the days that kids are assigned to attend, so that we know who's there and who's not. I pause there on those two procedures that we just worked on with principals, and just see if you have any feedback or questions on that.
So my question is, how are teachers being instructed once they've entered in the participation scores? What do you do, especially with the ones who are 0 or 1?
Yeah, what would you suggest they do? Reach out?
Well,
Yeah,
I'm just making
yeah,
sure they're
exactly.
instructed to
Yeah.
do something,
Yeah,
right?
that would be probably pretty
Yeah.
obvious, right? That they're going to reach out. That there's going to be multiple people reach out. The teachers are going to reach out. There's a student success team in each school that's going to reach out. And student services, when we have a pattern of individuals who are successfully engaging, we'll have social workers and family liaisons and others. So that's essentially what we're going to point all of our purposes on in student services this year, is to make sure students are engaged. I guess I'll say as a side note, we're still trying to iron out some of the enrollment issues. I would love to give you, maybe by week's end or next week, an idea of where everybody landed we're really working hard to say how many chose the in-person option, how many chose the home study option, how many do we have in e-school. That's still a moving piece of data right now, but I hope I can have that for you maybe by next week. But we really want to shift all that focus and energy we're doing in student services toward enrollment to now engagement. And that will be our primary focus. And it'll be right down to the teacher level. There'll be an expectation. If your student is marked at a P0, you need to make multiple efforts to reach out and contact and engage that family and find out why not.
And are they being instructed, you know, there is a team from student services or in your building that can help you. This is when you get to that point where please involve other people in helping us reach that student.
It starts at the school level. They have a school-based team, they have a PLC team that's at the grade level or the department, and then of course they have a student success team that the principal leads. We're not going to necessarily jump in and own this because it would be completely difficult and impossible for student services to do all of the management. It starts at that base level of school, teams, and then from there we support between Alex and I and some of our coaches. We attend all those school teams to identify what kinds of things need to matriculate for district support. So yeah, there's a weekly meeting of this data that will take place.
So you're saying there's a system and the teachers know how the system works?
It should.
That's what I want to make sure.
Every school has a success team of some sort that in elementary is meeting weekly or bi-weekly to be able to address those specific needs, from whether it's attendance issues to academic issues, to whether they need support at home. And this is where our administrator is able to coordinate efforts with either a social worker or even our family liaisons, with even our special ed and psych teams, to be able to say, how do we support families when they need it? What we found in the spring is that there were many families that were engaged and successful in person. As soon as we flipped to the online, they became at risk. Isn't that interesting? And so what we found is those teams have been critical in being able to say, how do we get the support to those families that need it most under the current circumstances? And that team is something that's already in place, and they're highly functioning. And I would actually encourage you to join one of those with me one of these times. I would love to have you come and just see the dialogue, the discussion, and the level of support they're providing to those kids that need it.
Great.
I would love to have you come, please. Love to have you come.
Isn't that one of the reasons why we're stopping school early and we're also not having school on Friday, so that teachers have time to reach out to those kids?
Engaging with those kids. Yeah.
Todd, anything you'd add on the secondary level for like teachers' ability to access a team support if they were concerned about a child?
Yeah, every school has an at-risk team, and they're meeting on a regular basis, and that involves counselors, administration, social workers, and others. And it's a practice they've long held and continue to do.
Yeah, thank you.
On the secondary, I saw in one of the communications that came to us that the secondary was only going to enter in their data every other week per student because they have so many more students. Which I understand their load is bigger, but that also concerns me that it's going to be easier for our older kids to fall through the cracks. So is there a way we can check up on those kids more often?
There's other data points that frankly, that's nice to know that secondary has. I mean, this is not the only data point we'll have for a student during the week. There's also running records within Power Grade, right? The Power grading part of that to know whether a student is completing assignments, participating in things that are going on based on scores that are generated in the grade book. We're looking at that as being something else besides just this participation score that can be looked at almost daily, right? And so we are still negotiating that out as to what will be the expectation for the secondary schools. It's not firm. I think the superintendent expressed his interest yesterday to us as well, as saying the more often the better, of course, as long as it's manageable. We have to also be weary of how much additional stuff we're asking teachers to do at this time, right? So we're weighing all that fatigue of extra expectations that are there. The reason that I think that we do insist that elementary stay with this is the elementary doesn't have necessarily the ability to say there's a grade book that's as active, right? We know that that's more of a standards-based reporting that comes out, so not all the classrooms have this is how the student's doing on a quizzes and assignments kind of a thing in the grade book, as they do at the secondary level. So there is a second data point that secondary schools can use to track our students participating and being successful academically with the grades.
Yeah, as long as they're still focused on watching over those kids and not just that once every 2 weeks. Yeah, then that's great.
any other questions about that emphasis? I mean, there's lots going on in student service. I just wanted to just give you that idea of something that we think is timely and important. We get out in front and get everyone participating, and I appreciate Jennifer's follow-up questions on that. Anything else?
Okay, our final member of council who has not reported yet is Caleb. And Caleb, if you'd come up and just give us an update about communications at this crazy time of year.
Hey, it's just a quick update on, I'll keep it on COVID-related things that we're doing right now. We're working constantly with members of council, Todd, right now, specifically on getting this information out regarding the phases. I think every member of council at some point or other has been working with our department to get something out specifically related to what's going on in school right now. We continue to deal with some fallout from the Mike Lee stuff because it was such a kind of national thing. We're now getting hit with trolls at different schools. Just yesterday, Westridge is getting hit, and so we're monitoring school pages a little bit more often than we normally do instead of just relying on our content managers, just to make sure that we're catching what they're dealing with. We continue to work on our kind of community outreach campaign running off of the Superheroes Wear Masks video that we released a couple weeks ago. In the next week or so, we should be receiving some signs that we're going to start putting around the community and at schools, just to continue to encourage masks and show that it's a community effort that we're working together on. We're currently working with technology and teaching and learning on some technology and Canvas communications to get out to parents, to help them be able to access Canvas and work with their students better from home. Really just anything that pops up along those, anytime we get questions from the community, you see all the Provo Forward stuff, and that drives a lot of what I work with different council members on as we try to develop our communication plans. A lot of it does take some time to get it out. This phases information is so complex that it's taken this much time to get it out. So now that you've been able to see the final plan, we'll get that out today with the changes that have been recommended, and we'll continue to work forward or move forward on different topics that come up and work with whoever we need to. I think that's the majority of the COVID side of things. We have everything else that we're doing as well. We're also working on a professional development video for our teachers for their first PD day to kind of keep up the encouragement to keep going and thank them for what they're doing. And that's going to be taking up a lot of time over the next week or so, especially for Shauna. So.
On that, I told Todd yesterday that calendars need to be updated on all the school sites because they're not showing those PD days off.
Yeah, so Todd reached out to me yesterday,
Okay.
and so we're working on getting out, and Keith also mentioned something, getting those updates out to the public, so we're working on that right now as well.
And I talked to principals in principals meeting about it yesterday.
Great.
The main calendars have been posted since our last meeting, but the other calendars, kind of as it filters down through the system, are still being worked on. So we're glad that you helped us to notice that as we're trying to get it cleaned up.
Carol, when you said that Westridge was hit yesterday, what do you mean?
It was, from what we can tell, it was a Russian troll that just was
Really?
posting the same thing over and over and over again on all their different social media sites. And so it took us a while to figure out what was going on and then go have them block it all.
We made the big time.
Yeah.
The Russians cared about us.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Edgemont's been hit a little bit too. Last Thursday after the tweet initially happened, I was dealing with the media most of the day that day regarding that and helping them work through what to do with the trolls that were hitting their school that day. So those are the two that have been hit the most. For whatever reason, Westridge got hit yesterday, but it's just, there's also a lot of misinformation out there, and so we're going through trying to make sure that even if it's just normal community members, parents, whatever, posting that it's relevant information and correct information so that the message coming from the school district especially can be consistent.
This is probably silly, I don't know. Might there be some value in sending a follow-up message to Senator Lee's office and letting him know what has been the fallout for us from him taking 30 seconds and sending something that in my opinion was irresponsible? Just to let him know, this is what happened, and I don't know, just something to maybe
You can do it. I know
consider.
Keith corrected him on some stuff on Twitter and called him out a little bit, and all the media didn't use a lot of my statements, but we made it clear that cause problems. We weren't all
Did he
that.
reach out at all? to the
Not that I know of. I
district?
don't know if he ever responded to. I never saw that he did.
Now, he is a proud T-bird. And, you know, it was, I mean, it brought some negative attention because he put it in a negative light, but at least it shows everyone who's worried about the virus that, wow, they're taking it pretty serious. It was a national advertisement for Provo School District is not messing around, we're taking care of teachers.
Right, and I think it's his flippant comment that created this, that's,
Yeah.
I think is the problem. And so it's ongoing, so
Yeah.
even if there was an immediate response right when it happened, I don't know, and certainly I'm not directing this to happen or really putting any huge appeal, I'm just tossing it out there. There might be some value
Yeah.
in sending something more formal to him to let him know that he might want to restrain himself a little bit, not just with this COVID thing, but just in general.
That's something we can look into, maybe work with Keith on that if we want to do that. But overall, the at least locally here in Utah, the fallout from that was positive for us.
Right.
We got a lot of support. The school's been getting a lot of support. Harmony shared emails with me from all across the state, people saying that he was out of line and they support what she's doing. I can't remember who mentioned with Stephanie that we've got other districts now asking where we got those dividers and things like that. So other than kind of the national, international troll level stuff, it's been actually been a positive for the district, but that's social media for you.
Right, and things like that are always gonna happen, but I don't know, I think it's irresponsible to do
Julie, I
that.
think one of those things, it might be just an invitation to see if we can get Senator Lee to come visit our schools and just see what we're doing.
Just, yeah, raise
Yeah,
awareness
that's
is
what he
never
did
a
that,
problem,
the
right?
superintendent did that. We could look into doing something more formal and official. I don't think it's a bad idea.
It's always better to be more aware than less,
Yeah.
right? So he may need some help in getting there.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Is there a difference between a cage and a plastic disc divider? I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
What do power shields really represent?
Thank you, Caleb. So
I
that's
have one more question
Go right
for
ahead.
Todd. Can you give us an update on sports, like how things are going there?
Good question. They are going, and our teams are continuing to compete. We haven't noted any outbreak at this point. I think the schools have been really good about sending the message that it requires all of them to do what they can to ensure that they have a full season. Nevertheless, the word has gotten out to through the schools that the typical traditions and practices of honoring seniors and doing those kinds of things may be better to do it earlier in the season than later. You just never know. I know the schools have worked very closely, and we're in agreement as a district with all the districts north of us up to through Davis around how we're managing spectators. And so the agreement right now amongst all the districts is that we've limited capacity in our facilities, in both our stadiums and gyms, at 25%. And we divide that amongst the visiting and the home teams. Tickets are sold online. You have to have a ticket to get in. They're not doing tickets at the gate. Masks are required, particularly when they're entering and exiting or when they're in close proximity to others, when they violate that 6-foot kind of bubble that we try to maintain, so bathrooms and concessions and so forth. Concessions have been changed in that it's grab and go, prepackaged. They're no longer doing any of the prep on site. Both schools are broadcasting all their events, to the best of my knowledge, through YouTube, so that those who are not able to attend can watch the game through streaming. We have a big event this coming Friday where Timpview football is visiting Provo High. And so we're working to figure out how we're going to manage that particular situation, knowing that there's always a great interest in our community to be in attendance. And so that's going to be a challenge for the schools this week.
If our schools close down because they have 15 cases, do all the sports close down?
Our understanding, if the school is not in session, teams are not in session. in addition to that, you know, we have that 3 positive cases in a classroom, we'll close a classroom, 3 positive cases, or it could be less, but 3 is definitely the line. 3 cases in a team would shut down the team. Now, going back to your earlier comment in the meeting, our great concern is that, and we're hearing this and maybe seeing this a little bit, is that families and students are avoiding testing or maybe concealing illness because they don't want to be the ones responsible for shutting down a season or a team. We understand that, and absolutely, you know, trying to help our students see the long-term implications of that, though, where they continue to spread the virus and might have even more drastic ramifications. You know, that's part of the learning process, helping them mature and understand that their decisions in the short term may have longer term implications.
Okay, so
Are there
that's
any
pretty much
other
our report.
questions? I'm working on trying to formulate one. I don't know how to get this out in the right way, so if it doesn't come the right way, Doug, I apologize. We're looking at the participation, and I guess the question I have is, how is that participation and engagement factored in, or is it factored in terms of summative evaluation, mastery of content? Those are obviously very important formative data points. How much impact do they have on the actual potential advancement of a student, moving them forward?
That's a great question. I think that we spoke a little bit when we were creating that document, and I went through it quickly enough that I don't know that I pointed out to you the spot where we wanted to say that this participation, like attendance, it is important, and it is an indicator usually of someone being on track to be successful academically in a summative sense. But it is something that, from a standards-informed or standards-based grading standpoint, it shouldn't necessarily be the thing that dictates the grade of the individual. And I know that this is probably another one of those silver linings around COVID, is that we're probably being pushed more to better understand that a student's participation isn't what essentially determines their grade. So I think that we're trying to separate those two, and we tried to make it explicit in the rubric that this is just a piece of a puzzle. It's about kind of more effort and them being there and trying, right? And that certainly is something teachers value, because without try, you know, as a teacher, you can do very little for someone who's not present. But in the grading and the academic credit that we receive towards graduation and so forth, it is not, of course, the main thing that drives that. We would be concerned, of course, if we were to go, because I think this is what is going to be ironed out today with Stephanie, is that if someone goes essentially 2 weeks with no, like, zero engagement, we are essentially kind of in that spot we are with someone who doesn't attend school for 2 weeks, and we'd have to look at as to whether we need to suspend their enrollment with us. And therefore, it's kind of more of a funding issue as it relates to them continuing to be with us as a student if we have multiple weeks where we just cannot get any indication that there's any sort of involvement in our program. So it probably impacts the funding side maybe more so than the educational outcome, but it impacts both of those. Does that?
Yeah,
That's
I'm really sensitive to the importance of making sure that we deliver a quality educational experience with adequate rigor and mastery of content. And of course, those things can occur without engagement. And so, but there's having that delicate balance between not allowing those formative criteria, that, as important as they are, to override some of those summative things that are really demonstrative of mastery of material and readiness to move on to the next level of study. And so I'm just probably a little more sensitive to that issue given my current situation at work anyway, as I'm trying to balance that.
We'll need to tease that out, and it'll be something that'll be an ongoing conversation, because this is a new thing, but it's also, we need to make the progress toward the very thing you just said.
And a lot of those formative data points underlie the summative data that comes out eventually.
Thank you.
They go together, they can't be separated, but we need to make sure our decisions for advancement and mastery are based on good data. Any other? If not, let's move on to the next item. And Todd and Stephanie, looks like you have the next one, school-related rentals. Who would like
You wanna
to lead
take
off?
it?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Since you've been talking a lot anyway.
I would make a comment about that, but I won't. So, you received a proposal, hopefully you received a proposal to look at how we provide facility use. Yeah. Earlier in the summer, there was an agreement, and I believe you passed a resolution, I don't think it was a resolution, but you agreed that we would not allow any more outside rentals for this year, given the needs to clean and to focus in on district programs, that all outside rentals would be suspended for this coming year. In that world, however, what we failed to present to the board is there are groups that have long-standing relationships with the district. While they're not district-sponsored, because with that comes issues around finance and personnel and liability. There are programs that involve district staff, mostly coaches at the secondary level. Programs that use our name and our logos, and then that have also become very reliant on our facilities to serve youth. And these often are programs that are feeder to high school programs. And so I'm talking about athletics primarily, but there are other feeder programs out there, I'm sure, that rely on us and that our programs rely to develop kids so that once they do get to the high school level, they're able to participate at a much higher level. So that the decision to suspend all outside rentals has greatly impacted them. It's kind of left them out of consideration. And so the proposal that you received is to start to look at this a little more nuanced fashion, in that we might create a kind of a third category from district sponsored and non-district sponsored to maybe from maybe a lack of a better term, a district affiliated program. That would be somewhat in line with the city park and rec program, who we do provide through an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement, use of our facilities, but that we'd classify these programs that are clearly somewhat linked to us, either through our personnel, our name and likeness. They're attached to a feeder program. They have a long history of using our facilities. We'd consider them district affiliated, and why we would continue to require them to provide all the documentation for liability insurance, provide to pay the cost for rental and specifically for cleaning, as we've done in the past. But we would put them in this category that would allow them, particularly this year during COVID, access to our facilities when available. And the thinking around this is that our schools, first and foremost, their priorities are to our own programs. So they would schedule facilities accordingly, and they're looking at making sure that cleaning, disinfecting is taking place. But then when there is availability on the calendar, that these youth programs would be on par with city rec programs to start to schedule and use those programs. So we're talking like Provo and Timp youth football, Bantam basketball. I think there's some volleyball programs that are out there. A key to this is ensuring that we provide equitable access, and so there would be onus placed on the schools to ensure that both boys and girls programs are getting equal opportunity, but that they would be included in this special category while we continue to suspend rentals for any and all other programs that are outside the district. So I know BYU dance is one that will possibly approach us. They would be considered in that kind of outside category. They're not necessarily a feeder program with a close relationship with us. There are others that come along periodically that want to use our facilities. They would continue to be in that suspended category, but we'd allow these youth programs some access.
So Todd, if I hear you, we're talking primarily about athletic types of rentals. What other types of rentals do we commonly have in our building that would be non-athletic that we deal with? I know the BYU dances.
The
what
dance
that could be.
program, BYU tends to be a heavy user. There's some other dance programs, private dance companies that come in periodically.
The high schools actually get rented out a lot.
They do.
I don't know that it's somebody who comes in consistently. I mean, they may rent it for 1 or 2 things and then they're gone for the rest of the year, but, I guess Todd and I have talked a lot about this, and we talked about it in council. My concerns would be, we're cracking the door open to you all getting more pressure from other groups to say, well, you're doing it for them, why not us? And that's why Todd is trying to segregate why this is more of a necessity or a need, because it's district affiliated versus, I hate to keep using BYU Dance, but they're a good example, versus BYU Dance is not district affiliated, but they love using our facilities because of the flooring we have. The other concern, I think, Jim, when you asked about sports, is making sure that we're equitable in how we do offer these to district affiliated groups.
These programs that we identified really, from my perspective, have lived kind of in this gray area. They're not district sponsored, but because of our coaches, use of our name, use of our facilities, if we were to ask anyone in the community, they would be hard pressed to say they're not connected to us in some way. And so, again, because of financial, personnel, and liability reasons, there needs to be a firm line there. But I think this tries to acknowledge that gray area a little bit, while maintaining those safeguards to protect the district.
Jim,
Part of
robotics, CTE.
Yeah, that's part of what I was also inquiring about, I guess,
Yeah.
made more explicitly, was academically oriented groups and organizations that may have a relationship with the district, but
Right.
not in an athletic way, but would be academic.
That's where we
And
have
this
to be careful
category
with
wouldn't
equity.
exclude them by no means. If they could show a clear connection to us and that, we have with personnel and name and so forth, I think we'd have to consider them.
Okay.
Junior cheerleaders, those kinds of things.
And who is making that call? So,
Well, we do have a process, and that this was part of our conversation in council, that this is gonna, I think, press us to improve our processes. But we do have a process in place through the fundraising policy, where a group can petition, it goes through the building administrator, to use our name and likeness. And I think we would continue to build off that. So there is a process in place. I think we need to develop further processes along with it.
and how much education is gonna have to happen with groups who have come in before, where there hasn't been a needed process, where there hasn't,
A lot.
right?
They're probably gonna have to go through
This is
the new
new,
process.
and we'll have to help bring them on board a little bit around the expectation with this.
And do we anticipate, you said a lot, we anticipate that being a big,
Well, it's just from the standpoint of the doors have been wide open to
Right.
virtually any kind of rental. It could be a political event, it could be a local community event of any kind. And again, with COVID hitting and really making us reprioritize, that our schools have to be ready for school to host kids and staff the next day. And so every day we've got to get that place clean. And so the idea of just any rental in the community coming in and using the place until midnight, we have to rethink that, because we don't have custodians who work all night long. So we have to build in the time, and that means taking away some rental options from people in the community. This is a way of saying we're willing to expand this a little bit, but again, there's still going to be a no to certain requests.
Yeah, they still need to be within the hours that we've set so that we have time to clean out in the evenings. So there may be some times where we just don't have the ability to allow them to, because they may want it at 7 o'clock at night, and we're gonna say, no, that's when we're cleaning our buildings.
And having spoken with some of these groups, I think we would have to, I think we would have to consider them. And having spoken with some of these groups, I think we would have to consider them. And having spoken with some of these groups, I think we would have to consider them. they're aware, and I think they're fully committed to being supportive of whatever we put out in front of them. I think they're just mostly grateful that we'd even consider this at this point to try to support them. Because there has been whether we acknowledge it or not, a long-lasting relationship with them, and then it feels like because we're focusing on our needs, which we should be, that they're kind of left out and they're not sure where to go, what to do, right? And again, to remember, these are Provo City School District students that are part of some type of a feeder program that leads to another school district-sponsored program.
Okay, so I think this is good and that we should support this. My question is, this seems very, like all these programs probably are using the high schools for the most part. I know several of the elementaries do have non-sponsored and non-affiliated groups who traditionally rent out on a very regular basis and count on that money. Have we heard from any of those principals? Are they asking for us to try to be able to do those groups so they can have
It's quite
that
the
income?
opposite, actually.
Yeah.
When Stephanie announced this at the administrator retreat, that we were not doing
They
rentals, there
It's
was
the only time I've
virtually-
been applauded.
Yeah, there was a cheer that went up, because it can be a struggle to manage all of these requests. And then, of course, you've got, we do have an increase in our custodial staff now, but the goal wasn't for that to be going toward rentals. The goal was that would be spending more time during the day, keeping the schools clean. So they're actually grateful.
We are gonna have to get some outlines from Jeff's folks on what the cleaning expectations are. You know, when we discussed this with the city through the rec center has probably got a cleaning solution that they could offer us some help with, to be honest with you. So I'm comfortable with, if they start, for example, the junior jazz starts, they're gonna limit the number of buildings that they use, and they're gonna come in and clean after to our specs, and probably for them beyond our specs, maybe, I don't know. But we're probably gonna have to develop those cleaning protocols if we're going to tell these groups that you're responsible for cleaning, unless the custodial staff feels comfortable covering it. So that's one piece we have to work out still, I think.
Are we limiting how many people in the building too?
Yes.
Because, I mean, I've been participation with band and basketball, and there's no social,
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, social distancing is very difficult, especially in the hallways when you're waiting to go into the next, or,
So we haven't engaged the Bantam groups quite yet. I do know that they're at the doorstep. But our initial conversations with these groups have been that, you know, our expectation is that they would continue to follow the expectations we're putting on our own programs around limited capacity, masks, social distancing. All those things would be required if they're gonna come in and use our facilities. And I think it's totally appropriate that we set those kinds of expectations, as well as, you know, limiting the time and looking at the cleaning regimen that needs to take place. You know, I think rather than what we've done is a hard no, we're saying that it's possible if, and then we start to qualify it for them.
The challenge, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, is going to be that we stay within these limitations, because this could push wide open, or at least people's expectations could expand, and that puts all of us in a position where we have to just remind them, no, this is a limited access, it's not just wide open.
And I know you say this district affiliated designation, are these gonna be two separate processes? If they can get that designation, then they can use, are we gonna be talking to the same people over and over again that are wanting this access, but they really aren't under our,
Possibly.
you know, so if we can say, okay, Provo Youth Football, you are district affiliated, we don't need to keep having that conversation. And whatever other program, you are not district affiliated, so we aren't, please stop coming and asking.
I think once they can demonstrate to us that connection, and we grant them that affiliation, you know, I think that we're in the clear. Would be a matter of monitoring and adjusting if things change. I do think, though, that if we move this direction, these other groups that have not had a real clear affiliation with us will press harder to acquire that. I'm thinking about BYU Dance would be an obvious one, where I'm sure they would try to engage us to say, how do we get this affiliation so that we can have access?
Are these groups nonprofit?
Yes.
I think we're talking a lot about the cleaning, we're talking, obviously there's gonna be different standards for outside activities versus
Yes.
indoor activities, but are we gonna just kind of say, here are the rules? And not try to decide which groups have to comply where
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, I think through Stephanie's department, she's developed a formula for cleaning per square footage. It apply across the board, whether it's in the stadiums or in their gymnasiums. We'd hold the same expectation regardless of the group.
How about teams that do fundraisers using our facilities, hosting tournaments? Will they be able to do that? There are teams, but they're bringing in other people, and then they need to do concessions,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
that's, I think that's something we have to look at very carefully, because there's one thing to provide them access and let them play games and support them specifically. It's another thing when they're drawing teams from all over the region into our buildings. And I think it's a matter of risk. What's our tolerance for risk? Obviously our risk is going to be much higher in that situation. And I think that's, if and when that day comes, they make that request, we'd have to look at that very carefully.
I think there's the door right there. That's one of the pushes, is they're not really district affiliated, but they're doing something for us, so why wouldn't we let them in? So that's-
Volleyball, I know
It's
volleyball.
really hard to go to Hawaii if you don't have these tournaments.
I know.
They can't go to Hawaii
I
anymore.
know
anyway.
volleyball has
You guys didn't
been a
stay
big
in Hawaii.
user of our facilities for these kinds of regional tournaments, and it's been a fundraiser for programs. I think we need to look at that very carefully, because with that comes greater risk.
Yeah. And I think as soon as you allow that group to do it because they made a case, then the next group's gonna make, that's my main concern with this, is there's going to be pressure on each of you and some of us to push the door a little further, push it a little further. And the next thing we know, we're up against having to rein it back in because the door's been pushed and we haven't been able to say no, and well, we allowed them to stay an extra hour late.
And now our schools are not getting
And our
clean.
schools aren't getting clean. That's my concern with this.
So are you saying we shouldn't read our emails that people send us?
Never say that, Nate.
You can be our
Yeah,
designated
form to
responder,
death.
Nate.
It is the pattern in our district, right? They get a no at the school level, they'll go, if they go to the district level, maybe they go to the district level, but the next stop is typically to the board member.
So at some point, we're all going to have to be able to say no.
And
We're all
I
gonna have to be able to say, nope, that's outside of the standard we set.
And I think, I know at least for me, it's much easier for me to kind of abide by those guidelines if we know exactly what those guidelines are.
Yep.
And we can point them. Sometimes as soon as I start entertaining a conversation, it gets much, much harder. Whereas if I know, you know what, here is the criteria, if you meet it, great, I'll, talk. If you don't, there's not much I can do. And so I think making that available and very clear, not just to us, but even on our website, even on, so anybody can look at that, is important.
The tournament requests are the one, the requests that give me the most pause. It makes me the most nervous. And it's really volleyball and basketball where we'll see a lot of that.
So maybe we write into that it's single use, or, I mean, maybe we just put it in the criteria to limit that tournament use and just say
Just say
use the
we are not
facilities
hosting
for.
tournaments.
Right.
I
We
don't
could
want
just
you to
come right out
bring
and
your
say that.
COVID here.
Yep.
We have plenty of our own, thank you.
If it's not a Utah High School
Keep your
athletic
COVID to
event,
yourself.
Right.
then we're not
No,
holding a
promo
tournament.
COVID.
Can you remind me the restrictions for all the rentals that we have had, that's until we get to phase 3? Is that what we're looking at?
So
or
I
have we
think,
defined that?
remind me, Steph, but I think we've
It
asked that it's
said,
all
in
the
the
way through the
document, we
year.
wrote until we had a vaccine.
Okay.
So that was in the original document, the 28-page document that we looked at back in July.
Okay.
And I would suggest that, and maybe it already is based on what you said, but just maybe to reiterate that a big piece of the criteria for affiliated is this, are we serving Provo students? Are these our kids? And it might not be our activity, but are these our kids? And I think we need to do our best to support that where we can. And if it's not our kids, even if it's a youth group, even if it's a then maybe we don't.
I think that's the only real justification to even consider this, is that we're serving our kids in our district.
Exactly.
I guess I would get a little more fussy about the terminology, because I think if you look at, I mean, there's no question that the district has an obligation to, because we use public funds, we want to make our schools available, but our number one obligation is to our students and staff who come in to get their education on a daily basis. And if we cannot guarantee that we have a fully cleaned building for them, especially in light of what we're dealing with right now, then the answer is going to have to be no. And that's the hard message, because people want to continue on with how things have been in the past, and we've been very lenient with doing this in the past. But the fact is, if we cannot guarantee that on Monday morning and Tuesday morning and on and on and on, that the school is ready to be used for its main purpose, then I think we've gone too far. That we have to at some point say, no, we can't push this boundary any further.
And I think what I would suggest and respond with that is, I would feel comfortable with as tight of boundaries as we want to set. Get them set. We can be very narrow. And then, others toe that line, be
Are we
very
gonna,
firm.
going along with that, would we have zero tolerance? Like, if they're not abiding by it, or they're just out, or?
Well, I think we have to set a hard line like that. I mean, the superintendent is exactly right. Our ultimate goal is zero infections due to our facilities. And are we willing to waver off that goal? If we're not, then we'll have to set hard expectations and a hard line with people. If they're flagrantly coming in and not following, the distancing and the masks and doing all the things that we ask of them, they're jeopardizing our ability to meet our goal.
Good. On that note, we have hit the point where we need to move on for our business meeting. But the last item, board retreat agenda items, Keith, 30 seconds.
Okay. On September 25th, we have a day-long retreat scheduled, and we know that certain things will be on that agenda, such as an auditor report and some assessment reports, even though assessments were a little odd last year. If you have items that you would like to see on that retreat agenda, please send them to me with a CC to Jim and Melanie, and then we can vet them. And I'm asking you to do this well in advance, because if I hear 3 days before we need this or that and I don't have time to pull the data together, you'll be frustrated and we'll be frustrated. So just get that information to me, CC Jim and Melanie. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
45 seconds.
And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Board Member Bryson. We are adjourned from the study session, and let's get ready for the business meeting.
I should open the door.
If there's anyone who would like to maybe take just a real quick break, a couple of minutes, and we'll start in about 2 or 3 minutes. So you stand up, stretch.
Because I'm keeping you here, I'm sorry that you didn't want to.
My wife's coaching.
I've got donuts for you, so I'll bring them in.
And, it was a bad choice on her part, but she said she heard some girls talking and they're
I'll
like,
be right back. Get it started. I need to make one call.
Okay.
You should probably tell, but I heard there's a football team, and none of them are gonna tell. Oh, what should we do if we get it on our team?
I like the voice. That really
Exactly,
adds-
that
The
completely
voice is the
solves
best
the
part of that
story.
whole story. you know?
my wife wanted to tell her, you don't tell. But since she was working with schools, she said she restrained herself.
That's the good thing about the mask.
I don't know if it's appropriate to say before we start, but being a connoisseur of donuts, Krispy Kreme are the healthiest donuts you can consume.
There you go. Anne-Marie gets kudos.
And so, my wife always tells me no on the donuts, but I work with Krispy Kreme. They've done a study and they're the healthiest donut you can have. Okay, with that brief introduction.
And advertisement.
Well, I'm not advocating to buy Krispy Kreme, I'm just stating the research fact. I've done an in-depth study here. On Tuesday, it is today, Tuesday, August 25th, 2020, at approximately 9:27 a.m., and we are convening as the Provo City School District Board of Education and Business meeting. I will begin with the roll call. Jim Pedersen, Board President.
Melanie Hall, Board Vice President.
Keith Rachel, Superintendent.
Caleb.
Caleb Price, Communications.
Stephanie Bryant, Business Administrator.
Bon.
Bonnie Tatkis, Executive Assistant.
Anne Marie Harrison, Teaching and Writing.
Julie Rash, Board Member.
Nate Bryson, Board Member.
Jason Cox, Human Resources.
Alex Judd, Elementary Ed.
Todd McKee, Secondary Ed.
Doug Finch, Student Services.
Jennifer Partridge, Board Member.
And we welcome Board Member Rebecca Nielsen, who is with us via Zoom, and we excuse Board Member McKay Jensen, who is out of town.
We actually have to leave it open.
Can we leave it like that?
Yeah.
So
That's
it's
fine.
always-
We will begin with Anne Marie Harrison with the early literacy funding.
Thank you. So the state has an early literacy plan that districts, or that the state requires each district to submit. There is funding that goes along with it if the state accepts it. We've had a preliminary review of our plan, and so we feel confident that the state will approve it if you do. This is all coming from the state's goal of having students read proficiently by the end of third grade. And again, for our district, this means almost $300,000. The state has a serious investment in this. So our plan, as you can see, this is filled by a template that the state gave us. We had a group of district administrators, school administrators, district specialists in reading, work together with the state in this meeting to develop this plan in this format. You can see that some of the criteria are really state required. The section A, the early literacy, that comes right from the state literacy plan. You can see that we're reporting on the assessments that we'll give, that will drive data. We're getting some online testing through Acadians now, or DIBELS, which is the state measure. They've not allowed that previously, and so we have more of a possibility of getting some good data to use at whether the student is online or in the classroom. Number 3 talks about the interventions we're using. You may know that we have been working on reading interventions with Title I, and then supplementing that so that all of our schools have some very good, research-based, good, effective programs in place. This will supplement that and help us provide for all schools as needs come up. They require, next you'll see our reading framework for our district. So this is kind of a flow chart or path to show what schools are doing as they're meeting in PAT teams, in professional learning community meetings, to move students throughout these. So assessment pushes you up and down here in how you get services through the tiers. So the funds will, number 4, describing the use of the funds. It will provide Tier 1 coaching and support. We know that Tier 1 instruction, we've identified through an evaluation that that's an area of need. So this year, what's a little bit different than our plan this year, in the past we've done broad scale professional development and coaching. This year, we're looking for patterns over the course of years as we've been doing this, and we're going to do it more specific. So identifying teachers and teams, perhaps schools, where students are underperforming, and our training and support will go directly to those folks where students are struggling. We need to always continue Tier 2 as well, coaching training, principals training. The state has several really good, remarkably good trainings ongoing for administrators and teachers. So the final part of the plan here are the goals, and again, they wanted us to use this color coding guide to make a SMART goal. So you can see we have one goal pointed at our first grade students, one goal pointed at our second grade students, and again, this is based on the data from last year. You all know we weren't able to do the final administration of DIBELS, which is now called Acadians. So they looked at data from 3 years and guiding us in making these goals. So that's basically the plan, and so I'm asking for your approval and or changes. I need to submit this to the state by September 1st for funding, and I appreciate you meeting with us today to consider this proposal.
Are there any questions for Anne Marie regarding this proposal?
So you said from beginning of year to end of year numbers, we're really looking at not this last school year, but the school year before as our baseline?
So the state provided us the beginning to the middle. So
Okay.
we had that, and they have a system of kind of projecting what that growth may have been. That was one consideration. And then, as I recall, they took 2 or 3 years of patterns to help guide us in this. I mean, they admitted this is not a perfect way to do it when you can't measure the same cohort the same way.
So like for the first grade, it's an 8% improvement.
Mhm.
Do you feel that's really aggressive for this school year with our
I do.
COVID situation? And was this plan designed still with all that in mind, or is this like in a perfect year, this is what we would want?
So we worked on this plan starting in late June to July. The state, they do a lot of feedback and control on this. And they take your growth from the past 3 years and say, the rate should be higher than that. And by some percentages, 2 or 3. So, we do think it's aggressive, but the state wouldn't approve us going any lower on that one. I think all of us are in the same boat. In June, July, we hope we'd be back in school. But as you saw last spring, I think that there may be changes based on how the school year goes. If we're able to open more and provide a full range of services, that would be great, but who knows? There's actually a state goal too that everyone has to have. So we have 3 goals, and to meet the technical requirement of this, we have to meet one of those 3 goals. Last year, even given where we were, we met all of our, from beginning to the middle of the year, we met all of our goals. And again, the state is asking us to stretch a lot on this. And they have the ability to change that law and raise their performance by 10% every year if they want to. But I think it's a good stretching goal for us. And I think we have the ability to support it. We're working, our intervention team from the Title I office is working on an online intervention model using our programs. And we have some funding in here to hire people, instructional assistants, to provide it that way. So we're really trying to be creative, given the new environment, about making it more doable for teachers and for schools.
Thank you.
Julie?
I think I'm more want to make a comment, I think. I know that one of the concerns that has been brought up is since we started talking about this back in, March, I don't even know at this point. It was just the concern that as we pull kids out of school and as they aren't in school full-time now, that our level of education is going to diminish. I think that the jury's still out on how much that's going to happen. I have felt as a parent and a board member reassured that we are still going to be aggressive. We are going to stretch. As I talk to parents and I talk to people about what's going on, I need to be able to assure them that we're doing everything we can to still make sure when we get to the end of the school year, we haven't skipped a year. You know, we aren't taking third graders into fourth grader when they haven't learned anything. So I commend you on the plan, and I think we can all work hard. I have confidence in our teachers and our parents who are working at home with their kids. Hopefully we'll see that we meet this.
Any other item, any other discussion here? Thank you, Anne Marie. Appreciate. Stephanie, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Nope, thank you, Anne Marie, for being on top of that.
You know, maybe just to follow up on Julie's comment there. You know, we live in kind of a unique time right now with what we're trying to do. If there's been any silver lining that I have seen, is it's given a chance to really engage parents even more in their children's education than in the past. As much as we can do as educators and members of the school board, without that critical support of parents, we can only be so successful to a point. And again, if there's been anything positive about COVID, hopefully parents will realize this is a chance to really engage with us and really truly partner to help their children make the maximum amount of growth possible and to really create that dynamic partnership that we should have.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, Julie.
And maybe this is a question for a different meeting, but you say that Dibbles is now Acadians.
Mhm.
Is that anything more than a name change?
No.
Okay.
I mean, Dibbles changed and improved over time as they
Sure.
get huge data sets, but it really is an ownership title
Okay.
change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank
The
you.
data is comparable.
Well, if there are no more comments or questions, is there a motion to approve the early literacy funding?
I move we approve the Provo City School District early literacy plan.
I second that.
Motion by Board Member Hall, second by Board Member Partridge. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please indicate with aye.
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 The motion passes unanimously. And given that there's nothing else on our agenda, unless there's just a really burning desire to sit here any longer and have donuts, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn the business meeting.
We're done. Thank you for your time this morning. And
Thanks,
you all
everybody.
who have presented and questioned.
Why didn't you